Welcome back to the channel. If you watched the first episode in this series, we talked about the foundation of masculine improvement. Learning to control yourself before trying to control anything else, because discipline and self-mastery are where real strength begins. Today we continue this series, Becoming a Man Worth Respecting, and the second principle we're talking about might challenge a lot of people, because it addresses something that has quietly become normal in modern culture. Episode 2 is called Build Something Instead of Complaining About Everything. One of the clearest differences between men who grow and men who stay stuck is this. One group spends most of their energy criticizing the world, while the other spends their energy constructing something inside of it. Respect doesn't come from commentary, it comes from contribution. Productive men versus reactive men. There are two types of men you will encounter in almost every environment. The first type is reactive. Reactive men spend most of their time pointing out problems. They can identify everything that's broken in the system, everything that's unfair, everything that should be different. Their conversations are full of frustration and commentary. The second type is productive. Productive men see the same problems, but instead of stopping at observation, they ask a different question. What can I build here? Imagine two neighbors living next to an abandoned lot filled with trash and weeds. The first neighbor walks past it every day, shaking his head, telling anyone who will listen how terrible the city is for letting it stay that way. The second neighbor quietly begins clearing the space. One bag of trash today, a few weeds tomorrow, a fence a few weeks later. Months pass, and eventually that empty lot becomes a small garden. Both men notice the problem. Only one decided to create something. Reactive men talk about the world they want. Productive men start building it. The culture of complaint. We live in a time where complaining has become almost fashionable. Social media rewards outrage. Conversations are filled with criticism of politics, culture, workplaces, and institutions. And while some criticism is necessary, there's a difference between thoughtful critique and habitual complaining. Complaining creates the illusion of engagement without requiring responsibility. It's like sitting in the stands of a stadium shouting instructions at the players on the field. The spectator feels involved in the game, but the reality is that he carries none of the weight of the outcome. Many men fall into this trap. They develop strong opinions about everything happening around them, yet they rarely take steps to improve the areas they actually influence. A man who spends his entire day criticizing the world but builds nothing within it eventually feels powerless, because deep down, he knows that observation without action produces nothing. Why building creates fulfillment? There is a deep psychological difference between consuming and creating. Consumption is passive, creation is active. Think about the satisfaction that comes from building something with your hands or your mind. It could be a skill, a business, a home, a family, a piece of art, or even a well-developed idea. When you create something, you leave evidence of your effort behind. Imagine two men spending their evening after work. One spends hours scrolling through endless content, watching other people's achievements and opinions. The other spends the same time learning a craft, working on a project, or developing a skill. At the end of the night, both men use their time. One wakes up the next day with something new added to his life. The other wakes up with only memories of what he watched. Creation builds momentum, produces pride and ownership. It reminds a man that he has the ability to shape his environment instead of simply reacting to it. The builder's mindset men who build develop a different mindset over time. They stop looking at the world purely as consumers and begin looking at it as contributors. Picture a town where a bridge has collapsed. One group of people gathers around discussing whose fault it was. They argue about policy, funding, and responsibility. Meanwhile, a small group quietly begins laying new beams across the river. Years later, the people who argued about the bridge will barely remember the conversation. But the people who built the new bridge will still be crossing it. Builders understand that progress rarely begins with perfect circumstances. It begins with imperfect effort. You don't need permission to improve something around you. You just need the willingness to start. The responsibility of creation building something also forces a man to grow in ways that complaining never will. When you build, you encounter problems that cannot be solved with words alone. You must develop patience, resilience, and humility. Imagine a carpenter shaping a piece of wood. At first the edges are rough, the measurements are slightly off, mistakes happen. But each mistake teaches the carpenter something about precision and care. Complaining about the quality of furniture in a store requires no skill. Building a chair that can support someone's weight requires patience, practice, and responsibility. The same principle applies to life. When a man begins building something meaningful, whether it's a career, a skill, or a family, he develops discipline because the work demands it. Responsibility shapes character in ways that comfort never will. The parable of the two townsmen. Let me share a simple parable to illustrate this idea. Two men lived in the same town. Every day they walked past the same broken fountain in the town square. The fountain had stopped working years ago, and most people barely noticed it anymore. The first man talked about it constantly, complained to neighbors about how poorly the town was maintained. He wrote long posts online about how leadership had failed. The second man stopped by the fountain one afternoon with a toolbox. He examined the pipes, studied the damage, and began repairing what he could. It took time, it took effort. But eventually the fountain flowed again. The town remembered the man who fixed the fountain far longer than the man who complained about it, because people respect builders. Closings. As we close episode 2, I want you to ask yourself an honest question. Where in your life have you been spending more time complaining than creating? Maybe it's your career, maybe it's your environment, maybe it's something small that you've been frustrated about for years. Instead of pointing at the problem again tomorrow, consider what it would look like to start building a solution. Respect grows when contribution replaces commentary. If this message spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share the video with them. And if you're serious about becoming stronger, more disciplined, and more intentional in the way you live, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the final episode of this series. In episode 3, we're going to talk about something that many men misunderstand: how to protect and lead with strength without becoming hardened or bitter. This is the Ordinary Guide 2.0, Responsibility Before Ego. See you next time.